And it's Superior Spider-Man. Superior Spider-Man is actually Otto Octavius, who prior to the Superior Spider-Man storyline had brain swapped with Peter. Yet a piece of Peter still remained in his own body and didn't die in Otto's body, which ended up convincing Otto to be a hero, albeit a darker one. This small bit of Peter that was left in his body was also trying to regain control, for obvious reasons, because a superhero was piloting his bone mech. This small bit of Peter though was at times able to interfere or even control Otto temporarily. One of these moments came in Superior Spider-Man number 8, where there was a device that was capable of wiping Peter from Otto's brain, but to get the actual item, Otto had to perform surgery on a little girl. However, Peter didn't think that Otto was actually able to do it, so he tries to stop Otto from even performing the surgery, but he also didn't want him to get the thing that would wipe him from his brain. Also, Otto did this surgery while having his Spider-Man mask on and an additional face mask. But either way, this version of Spider-Man was definitely more ruthless and willing to kill, since he was still technically a supervillain. And at 9, Kane. The clone that would come to be known as Kane was the Jackal's first attempt at cloning Peter Parker. Initially thought to be a success, Kane eventually became deformed due to a flaw in the cloning process, and he continued to degenerate, and he was left further deformed and mentally unstable. Aren't we all? The Jackal allowed Kane to live as like a test subject to see how long he would be able to survive, and it ended up exceeding Jackal's expectations. As a result though, Kane experienced a strong feeling of rejection that might be kind of like a father-son kind of thing, you know what I mean. Kane left and realized that the degeneration that had caused his mental state to decline had also amplified his powers that he had genetically kind of inherited from Peter. His strength, speed, stamina, and agility were also comparable to those of Peter, but he also gained precognitive powers as well, which showed him flashes of the future, which seemed to be sort of an amplified spider sense. He also possessed a Mark of Cain, which was a corrosive touch that he used to leave eaten away handprints on victims' faces, which is pretty damn scary if you ask me. Also, if you're enjoying this video and want to see more, be sure you hit that like button and subscribe because it really helps us out against the algorithm almighty. Also, I'm dressed as Spider-Man and talking about Spider-Man, so I feel like that's worth a like. And at 8, Pestilence Spider-Man. When Apocalypse started his plans for world domination, he captured 4 people who he saw as being good enough to be his horsemen and corrupted them. Spider-Man became the horseman known as Pestilence. Pestilence was one of the horsemen that Deadpool, Cannonball, and Siren encountered in their alternate reality search for Cable. And even though Pestilence was accompanied in the fight by Famine and Archangel, all 3 of them were defeated. This version of Peter Parker has the same powers as his 616 counterpart, except this time they've been augmented by Apocalypse when he corrupted them. But I mean, like a Spider-Man who is literally a horseman of the apocalypse and asks people if they will scream while he sucks the marrow from their bones, I think it's safe to say that this guy's pretty damn scary. And he made his first appearance in 2005, which makes this character around the same age that Peter was when he got his powers, which is kind of ironic. He hails from Earth 5701, which is the age of Apocalypse Earth. And it's 7, Ghost Spider. Ghost Spider comes from Earth 11638, and in this reality, Peter Parker's Uncle Ben never died, and actually ended up helping Peter to train as a hero with his new spider powers, becoming the Amazing Spider, a famous and popular superhero who also became a rich and successful scientist, having his own company called Parker Technologies. With his resources and motivation from Uncle Ben, the Amazing Spider used transportation technology to bring Spider-Men from other universes to his and absorb their powers to increase his. After bringing the Spider-Man from Earth 616 to his Earth though, and making him believe that he arrived in this universe by accident, the Amazing Spider was weakened by the feedback of the dimensional portal. Eventually, the Amazing Spider was convinced that what he was doing was not in fact heroic and allowed himself to die. But after dying, the Sorcerer Supreme of Dr. Banner, infused Peter's spirit that was trapped in hell with the powers of the damned, causing him to become a form of Ghost Rider, calling himself the Ghost Spider. And honestly, this is one of the baddest spider suits of all time. I love it. If I could figure out a way to cosplay this, I would. And it's 6, Zombie Spider-Man. Okay, so technically this is Spider-Man, but it's a zombie version of Spider-Man, but I'm gonna count it anyway, because this is pretty damn messed up, zombie or not. On Earth 2149, an alien plague ends up infecting all superpowered individuals and turns them into zombies. However, it's later revealed that the Necronomicon from the Evil Dead was actually what caused this plague. But after learning that the plague was really bad, since I guess the fact that they were calling it a plague wasn't enough, or the fact that the world had to shut down, so the population wasn't wiped out, Peter ran home to get Aunt May and Mary Jane the hell out of Dodge. But when he got there, we got a good old case of Parker Luck, protagonist syndrome. Boom, zombie spider. He ends up becoming a zombie as soon as he gets home and eats the 2 most important women in his life. He also fractured his jaw before becoming a zombie so he could open his mouth more, I guess. Or kind of like man spider it. Yeah, it's not a pretty sight. Like, even by zombie standards, it's ew. Halfway through into number 5, Man Spider. Man Spider is the mutated form of Spider-Man which appeared in both the comics and the 1990s animated series, with his original appearance actually coming from the animated series. In the 90s cartoon, Spider-Man's transformation into the Man Spider was not caused deliberately like it was in the comics, but as a result of his body mutating further from the original spider bite that gave him his powers. After his attempts to ask Professor X and the X-Men for help developing a cure meet with failure, Spider-Man turned to his friend Dr. Mariah Crawford for aid. Unfortunately, his initial attempt to cure himself resulted in him accelerating the actual mutation process and growing 4 new arms. The accelerated mutation subsequently caused him to mutate into the Man Spider after fighting the Punisher and a recently mutated Michael Morbius. The mutated Spider-Man retained some of his memories and his emotional responses to seeing loved ones or people who reminded him of his loved ones but could not communicate with them. Eventually, during the final episode of the storyline called Neurogenic Nightmare, Dr. Connors reprogrammed devices that Vulture was using to absorb youth from other people and caused him to give Peter back his spider powers but not the mutation, resulting in the Vulture mutating into Man Spider, although somehow he had gotten rid of this mutation off screen later in the series. It's also worth noting that the introduction of Man Spider in the comics, which was thanks to this animated series, is actually what introduced the biological web shooters from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man into the comics as well. And at 4, Spider-Carnage. Spider-Carnage is my favorite alternate version of Spider-Man. Also being introduced in the Spider-Man animated series in the 1990s like the Man Spider from last number, this version of Peter Parker shared most of his early life with his superhero counterpart. However, the difference between these two was that Aunt May at some point died as well, being buried next to Uncle Ben. Thanks to some messing around with interdimensional portals by Jonathan Ohm, a version of a Carnage symbiote from another universe sensed this Peter's anger and latched onto him, turning him into the Spider-Carnage, a version of Spider-Man with the Carnage symbiote, if you couldn't tell. A villain set on revenge and the destruction of all realities. Spider-Carnage is one of the coolest iterations of Spider-Man to date in my opinion, and it's part of the reason I love the 90s cartoon so much. I watch it all the way through just so I can see Spider-Carnage at the end. And while there is a version from the comics just called the Spider, which is Spider-Man with the Carnage symbiote, this version wanted to destroy literally everything, so yes please, this is certainly the scarier of the two, just saying. Sorry comic lovers, okay? Look, I like the comics too, but Spider-Carnage is definitely worse than the Spider. Getting close to the end at number 3, Patient Zero Spider-Man. After the Punisher accidentally released Survivor 118, a chemical designed to help people adapt to a post-apocalyptic environment, Spider-Man was the first to show symptoms from it after he ate the rhino during a hockey game. The Fantastic Four subdued him shortly afterwards and put him in a cage for experimentation, but Ben Grimm also succumbed to the plague himself and freed Spider-Man from captivity, though the exact reason why he did that is unknown. As he escapes into the city, he briefly fought Wolverine and the Punisher, but soon the world would start to fall apart, and heroes and villains alike would become cannibals, eventually leaving the Punisher as the only hero left to fight them. A turf war erupted among the emerging tribes of cannibals, due in part to the King of Death's manipulations in an attempt to thin the herd, but Spider-Man, now referred to as Patient Zero, was the most successful, and took control of all of Manhattan for his own tribe, while the others left to stake new lands. They had to conquer other places. Especially given the recent world issues though, I think that this is certainly something that I can say a good majority of people are afraid of. Although I bet that there are some survivors on this earth that say Survivor 118, that the Survivor 118 plague is fake. Calling it. Penultimately, in at number 2, Wolf Spider. At an unknown time in this universe, Wolf Spider gained spider-like powers, but unlike most other realities Peter Parker, he became a villain, remorselessly killing this universe's Miles Morales and everyone who stood for heroism and responsibility. Because, you know, we're bad guys, it's what we do. First appearing in the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon in Season 4, Episode 16, this guy isn't even the villain of just one world. After finding a shard of the Siege Perilous, he traveled through dimensions to find the rest. One of these dimensions was Blood Spider's homeworld, where he allied himself with the Lizard King. After turning almost everyone into vampires, which is weird because I mean it was called the Lizard King, well, wouldn't you want to turn them into lizards, but whatever. He and the Lizard King hatched a plan to block out the sun so that vampires could just roam free on the earth. And this sounds very Dawnguard Volkihar clan to me. Okay, Peter? Like, what you gonna tell me that you need to find Oriel's bow next? And like a daughter of Cold Harbor? I don't know. Scar. Wolf Spider, though, was cold and ruthless and obsessed with gathering the shards of Siege Perilous, and seemed to have a grudge against Spider-Man and every Miles Morales. An evil Peter Parker is always a scary thing. And finally, in at number 1, Spider-Man. Peter Parker of Earth 11580 was once a promising young student, invited by Max Modal alongside his best friend Gwen Stacy to tour his bleeding edge company at Horizon Labs. One of the experiments the pair observed was a massive colony of spiders that Modell was bombarding with numerous radioactive particles in the name of genetic alteration. Parker, of course, fell into this colony where he seemed to be devoured, but in the process, the spiders became a singular hive mind construct that absorbed Peter's consciousness. So they started masquerading as the man they absorbed. The Hive, calling themselves Spidersman, put on the Spider-Man costume and began to fight crime in cruel York. First appearing in Spider-Geddon number 3, I absolutely hate the idea of a whole human being made of spiders, because that's just up. Look, I'm arachnophobic except for the odd time where I need to impress someone, but it's absolutely horrific to think of any being made entirely of spiders, okay? I would actually rather die. Even if this is a good guy. No fucking way am I looking at this man and saying, oh yeah, let's let him help us. No, he can go burn with the rest of the spider species as they fucking should, okay?
Kicking off the list at number 10, Spider-Man. We'll kick off this list on an itchy note. This version of Spider-Man from Earth 11580 is actually Spider's Man. You might be asking, wait a minute Taylor, spiders? Like more than one? Oh yeah, he's actually made up of thousands of spiders that work together as if they're one person, like a hive mind. See, before that incident, that horrible incident, Peter and Gwen were visiting Horizon Labs, and instead of one spider taking a bite out of Peter's finger and then blessing him with biceps and perfect vision, he instead fell into a pit of radioactive spiders where they all consumed him, and subsequently his consciousness was spread out through all of those spiders. Hive mind, so gross. How horrible is this already? If I just got robbed and Spider-Man came to save the day, I'd be sick. Just seeing a cover of this guy on Spider-Geddon issue 3 makes me so uncomfortable. I mean, hats off to Christos Gage and George Molina for making this character one of the most unique versions. You can definitely say that. Definitely unique. The Spider. Coming from Earth 15, the Spider, also known as Inmate 24739, made his first appearance in Exiles issue 12. Inmate, what's going on with that? Is Peter bad in this reality? Yeah, he's actually pretty horrible. He's a redhead who has a lot in common with Cletus Cassidy, and in turn he gets slapped with 67 consecutive life sentences by a jury. He's not as into the saving lives thing, he's rather into the opposite. He joined Weapon X after being drafted by the Timebreakers. Now, as horrible as the Spider sounds, he still feels like Peter when you read this comic. He has a similar sense of humor as Deadpool here, so it's still fun, although he's evil. Hyperion of Earth 4023 also joined, became the leader, and the Spider stood by his side as they planned on conquering multiple realities. Pete met his fate in issue 44 of Exiles when Firestar hit him with a Mega Blast. He turned into ash. Already cremated, look at that, we get to save money. And before we continue on with this list, if you want to go ahead and give us a thumbs up, that would be awesome. It really does help our nerd squad over here in our nerd base. You guys are the best. Thanks for sticking around. Let's keep going with this list. Number 8, Spider-Kid. Making his first appearance in Spider-Force issue 1, Earth 218 Peter's childhood is actually darker this time around, believe it or not. See, both of his parents passed away in a car crash, and Uncle Ben was a mean old man afterwards who was just horrible to Peter all the time. Peter actually changed his name to Charlie, and then he didn't try and be good. He actually became quite a troubled young man. He had to spend 2 years at the Administration for Child Services and then 2 more years at the Horizon Juvenile Detention Center. In order to get by, he chose to steal money from street dealers. He's not a bad kid, although I've just said that he is a few times. He just had a horrible childhood and he slipped down the wrong path. It happens. But that all changed when Charlie was recruited into the Superior Spider Army by Ashley Barton. She calls him Grandpa because he reminds her of an older Pete from her reality. He's like, yeah, I'm 13 though, please don't call me Gramps. Awesome. Coming to you live from Warp World, one of the most out there versions of Peter Parker hit the page in Infinity Wars issue 3. Moon Knight and Spider-Man are gearing up. They're making a game plan to take down Gamora. And Spider-Man says, look, just punch whoever I punch in a second. Deal? Easy peasy. That turns out to be a lot harder than imagined when the both of them merge together. Alongside Arachnite, we got to meet some other amalgams of characters. We got Ghost Panther, Soldier Supreme, Iron Hammer, and more, so much more. Peter's mind was also separated into 4 different personalities, each desiring dominance. So we have Science Pete, the Night Pete, friendly neighborhood arachnid Pete, and for when it comes to signing checks and shaking hands, we have CEO Pete. Number 6. Astro Spider. Jumping on over to Earth 3145, making his first appearance in Spider-Force Issue 2, John Jameson III was an astronaut for NASA, and during one mission, a spider got trapped in his suit, which it's an absolute nightmare scenario right there. But when the space shuttle was hit by cosmic waves, John then obtained these amazing new abilities. He didn't come home and stop bank robbers one quip and whip at a time. See, this Earth was now destroyed by a thermonuclear war, so Jameson was assigned to oversee the construction of a spacecraft on the Nautilus platform. He, along with 35 others, are the last of humanity. After this cosmic mishap, John can now read minds. He can create webs of solid telekinetic energy, but he met his fate a few issues later when he was feasted on by Verna. Sometimes being a spider totem sucks. Number 5. The Savage Spider-Man. Spider-Man, but a savage. So savage. This Peter Parker entered comics in Vault of Spiders Issue 1. When a plane went down over Antarctica, Peter was the only survivor out of his family. He didn't have powers yet, he didn't swing his way to freedom, but he survived by using the last parachute. During his rough emergency landing, the wind moved him around quite a bit, and unfortunately he landed in one of the worst places on the planet, a spider's nest in Savage Land. I was just done with the spider stuff, now we're back to being itchy again. They all just bit him over and over and over again, and powers of course soon followed. The Savage Spider-Man was the new protector of Savage Land. Later on, he was recruited into the Spider Army by Ghost Spider to fight off the Inheritors back on our Earth 616. Honestly, this is a great version. I love when Wilson Fisk sees the boy growing up again. See, he was the reason the plane went down in the first place those many years ago. So when he returns to see if this Savage Spider-Man is real, he gets a little payback. Number 4. Hostess Cake Spider-Man. I think it's time we talk about one of the weirdest but yummiest versions of Spider-Man. Not only is Peter dishing out quips and flips, but he's also feeding the world too. What a hero. This version was born in an ad for Hostess Twinkies, so naturally its own Marvel universe has to exist. And also, it's fun to make it exist and to think about it. When it came down to taking on villains, Spider-Man wouldn't web them up, instead he would just huck treats at them, because that always works. Twinkies, Hostess cakes, anything, you name it. Funny enough, in Spider-Verse Issue 1, the cakes are referred to as Golden Sponge Cakes so that they don't get sued. It's also the same issue where we see the end of Golden Sponge Cake Spidey. It's sad, but if he stuck around for too long, realistically, everybody would just get fat or riddled with cavities.
Spider sense tells me this cake isn't for eating. It's for throwing!
Number 3. Superior Spider. Starting in 2013, this version is the outcome of the Dying Wish storyline when Dr. Octavius planted his mind inside Peter Parker's. Nice little swap. There we go. We see this begin in Amazing Spider-Man issue 698. Peter gets a priority call from the Avengers, and when he meets them all on the raft, Cap informs him that one of his old enemies is dying, and Peter knows that it's Doc Ock before he even tells him. Cap says that he's asking for him. Well, rather, he's asking for Peter Parker. Peter goes in and he asks everybody for a private moment, just the two of them to talk it out, right? But when they're in there for that hot second, it's revealed that they somehow have switched bodies, page 20 and 22. So Peter in Doc's body is freaking out. He's worried what the hell to do, because now he's got his powers and his families and his friends are all at risk. You gotta stay away from those brain-swapping Octobots, that's the key. I'm not going to tell you what happens because it's really enjoyable. Go check it out yourself. Number 2. Spider-Boy. Marvel and DC are powerhouses, both on page and on screen. So when the two companies combine forces, we get some pretty amazing characters like Spider-Boy. Making his first debut in Marvel vs. DC issue 3, residing on Earth 9602, Spider-Boy is an amalgam of Spider-Man and Superboy. How epic is that? Spider-Boy is a clone. Now he's a clone of Peter who was created during an accidental lab explosion. General Ross felt responsible for this explosion, so he ended up adopting the young lab lad. They were a fun duo until Ross was taken out by a mugger. So Pete then became a hero. He put together the suit, became famous almost overnight. That whole event kicked off the with great power comes great responsibility vibe. Now back when he returned to Project Cadmus, Pete was given a web pistol to help him swing around town. In this story, he doesn't have webs here, but it doesn't really matter. Because of his new superpowers, he can focus gravity inwards to make himself stronger and move faster, or he can lower gravity around himself in order to jump higher, further, and faster. He just clicks the off switch on gravity and then climbs walls. Must be nice. Guy probably kills it with wall sits. And finally, number 1, Flash, Betty, and John. For the last one on this list, we figured we'd end on a 3-in-1. What If is releasing weekly episodes on Disney Plus currently, so I have to throw it back to one of my favorite issues from Volume 1 back in the 70s. What if someone else besides Spider-Man had been bitten by the radioactive spider? Written by Don Glutt, What If Volume 1 Issue 7, we get to see Flash Thompson, Betty Brant, and John Jameson get their shot at being Spider-Man. How lucky. First, Flash gets bit, he gets the powers, and he teaches a bad driver a lesson. With his new strength, I mean, he's a little bit too harsh. The middle finger always works, but okay, rocky start, that's fine. Then he decides to take a crack at professional wrestling. He thinks it's going to be a breeze, but due to said super strength, he killed the guy instead of tapping him out. Not much of a superhero there. The Vulture ends up ending his not so hot streak, so next up we have Betty Brant. Her costume is arguably the flashiest. It makes for great photo shoots, apparently. Gotta get those likes somehow, make those superpowered TikToks. I'm here for it. But when she runs out of web fluid while striking a pose, the thief that takes Uncle Ben's life runs on by, and no one does anything about it. And finally, this issue shows us John Jameson getting his shot. While his outfit was also pretty on point, his judgment was not. John tried to stop a space shuttle from crashing and didn't live to tell the tale. Next time you feel like web swinging to work, just remember that the responsibility thing is just as important as the powers.
Number 10. Savage Spider-Man. This Spider-Man hails from Savage Land. When he was just a child, he and his parents flew over Savage Land when their plane exploded. Although his parents were killed, young Peter Parker survived. He landed in a nest of giant spiders who raised him as their own, building up his immunity to their spider venom by biting him. That's what happened. Peter Parkerman would grow up to become Savage Spider-Man, a guardian of the Savage Land, who would later be recruited to join the multiversal Spider Army in the fight against the Inheritors. Savage Spider-Man has his origins explained and was first introduced in Vault of Spiders issue number 1. Vault of Spiders. Number 9. The Other Old Man Spider-Man. The other one. We've already talked about the senile old Spider-Man who basically goes insane in his old age and is severely depressed due to the city being overrun with corrupt politicians and criminals and due to losing Mary Jane and how that happened or why that happened. But we haven't yet talked about the old, seemingly immortal Spider-Man from Earth 18236. This version of the character is so old he doesn't even remember how long he's lived in the retirement home he now finds himself in. His life was extended after he received a blood transfusion from Deadpool, and in this alternate reality he is confined to a wheelchair while remaining impressively dexterous and strong. The old man Deadpool of this reality ends up in the same retirement home and the two team up together. I don't know about you, but I think a reality where Spider-Man is forced to team up with Deadpool, possibly forever because he can now live so long, is a pretty dark one, at least from Peter's perspective. You can find this version of Spider-Man and this version of Deadpool in their team-up series Spider-Man/Deadpool in issue 26. And friends, before we move on to the next spot, just a quick reminder to click like, click, and do the other things too, like comment, subscribe, you know, all the things. Thank you. Number 8. Web-Slinger. The Web-Slinger is an alternate version of Spider-Man who was first introduced in Amazing Spider-Man in 2014 in issue number 9, but we'd later learn more of his origins in Vault of Spiders issue number 1. Here we discover how Patrick O'Hara and his horse Widow got their spider-like abilities. A spider that had become exposed to an elixir bit both of them one day, granting them miraculous abilities. This elixir had been made by Patrick's colleague Dr. Michael Morbius, who made and sold elixirs and participated in a traveling show along with the gunslinger. However, Morbius was transformed into a vampire when he himself consumed the elixir and began to feed on human children. Patrick was forced to confront Morbius, who sacrificed himself in a laboratory explosion, rushing towards it instead of away to make sure that the people would be safe from him forever. Tragic. Number 7. Mayhem. Mayhem is an alternate version of another alternate version of Spider-Man. It's a lot of alternates on alternates. The alternate version they're an alternate of is Spider-Girl of the Earth 982 reality, aka MC2. Mayhem is April Parker, the clone of May Parker, Spider-Man and Mary Jane's daughter. April was initially antagonistic when she awoke from her stasis, but was soon after brought around to the side of good and even integrated into the Parker family, becoming like a sister to May and taking the name April. At school, May explained their identical appearance by saying April was her cousin. However, April would eventually turn to the dark side once more, taking up the mantle Mayhem after becoming jealous of May. April believed there could only be one Spider-Girl woman, Spider-Woman. Number 6. Spiders-Man, Earth X. Spiders-Man of Earth X is different from the Spiders-Man we talked about in part 3 of this series, who hailed from the Earth 11580. Spiders-Man of Earth X, or the reality of Earth 9997, is a villain who ended up joining the Skull, and used his ability abilities to torment the Skull's prisoners. We don't know what his life was like before. We merely know that a mutation likely caused him to turn into a lizard-like being whose skin looks similar to the pattern of Spider-Man's suit. He has illusion casting powers which allow him to cast energy webs that cause very realistic illusions, making his victims relive the most tragic moment of their lives. Number 5. Ultimatum. Miles Morales of Earth 1610 has not been integrated into the 616 world, and because of that and because of his awesomeness, we often associate him with the main continuity, but he isn't the actual Miles of Earth 616. We have one of those, as a matter of fact, who is in fact not a hero, but instead a criminal who once worked for the Kingpin. He ended up being sent to the reality of Earth 1610, but made his way back to Earth 616 eventually. Returning, he now had knowledge of the lives people had lived in 1610 before the world was reformed as Battleworld, and then was later deconstructed and returned to normal by Reed Richards. His plan was to get rid of Miles and his family, sending them back to their home reality. However, it didn't really work out when he put it into action. Still, Ultimatum could be waiting for the right moment to strike again, and also boasts of having the immensely powerful Green Goblin of Earth 1610 at his beck and call, who also came along with him to Earth 616. Number 4. The Lizard. The Lizard was originally Peter Parker in the reality of Earth 65. Peter was a friend of Gwen's and wanted nothing more than to be just like his favorite hero, Spider-Woman. He worked on a serum that would help him to become like her and also help him to stand up to the students who mistreated him, which Gwen often did for Peter whenever she noticed that he was being teased. Unfortunately, the serum did not work as Peter expected and turned him into the monster and villain known as the Lizard, a monster which Gwen as Spider-Woman was forced to kill, only to find out after that all along it had been her friend Peter, who'd simply turned himself into the Lizard in the first place because he wanted to be like her. Oh my goodness. It's a pretty tragic story just all around. For Gwen, for Peter, ugh. Number 3. Venom. This version of Spider-Man comes to us from what we're referring to temporarily as Earth 848. That's a temporal reality number though, so don't get too attached to it because it's probably gonna change. As implied by the name of this point, he is from the What If inspired series Spider-Man Spider Shadow, where we imagine what would have happened if Peter hadn't decided to part ways with the symbiotic black suit we've come to know as Venom, but instead decided to stay bonded to it, basically becoming Venom. Here, Spider-Man becomes a merciless anti-hero slash villain who kills his enemies, and the Sinister Six must band together in order to try and survive. Well, a version of the Sinister Six at least. He also sports a pretty sweet beard here. Beards make you dark and edgy, right? I don't know, I've never had one, so let me know. Number 2. Black Suit Mr. Fantastic. If you thought Peter Parker keeping the black suit was a bad idea, wait till you see who else gets their hands on it on Earth TRN 848 in Spider-Man Spider Shadow. None other than Mr. Fantastic of the Fantastic Four. Well, he isn't really intending to get his hands on it, it's more like it gets its tendrils on him after blaming Reed for causing Peter to leave it. The black symbiote suit then forcefully bonds to Reed and takes control of his brilliant mind, using it to extract its own offspring. So it's likely only going to get a lot more dark in this series before it gets any brighter. If it gets any brighter. I guess we'll see what Chip Zdarsky has in store for us. Number 1. Carnage. While we might know Aunt May's alternate Spider Totem persona as a hero, the one who hails from the reality of Earth 3123, Spider-Man, she also has her own dark spider alternate. We made this version of May Riley who goes by the mantle Carnage in Spider-Verse issue number 2 out of 2019. Here Spider-Man finds herself attacked by her dark alternate, Carnage, who comes through a portal into Mam's reality, and hails herself from Earth 20143. This version of Aunt May is instead bonded with the Carnage symbiote and believes firmly in spreading chaos and death throughout the multiverse. It takes May working in tandem with all her good counterparts across the multiverse to fight back this villainous version of herself, an alternate spider person.
Kicking off the list at number 10. Ghost Spider. Coming from Earth 11638, aka the perfect world. Okay. This Peter Parker has a much brighter beginning, meaning Uncle Ben never actually passed away and gave the whole great responsibility speech. Instead, he encourages Peter to become a stronger Spider-Man, which sounds good on paper. It sounds like the ideal world. But does he recommend protein shakes and proper exercise and nutrition? No. See, Uncle Ben pushes Peter to abduct Spider-Man from other worlds and then absorb their life force via this portal that that Parker Technologies created. So he's a bit of a dick, this Uncle Ben. He's not really the nicest guy. Maybe he's fine, I don't know. This whole system seems a little bit whack. Now eventually Earth 616 Spider-Man shows up. They both hear about each other. It's interesting because Uncle Ben poisons our Peter and then he wakes up confused and they fight it out, and our Peter Parker comes out on top, luckily, with the perfect amazing spider getting his soul sucked into that machine. Now the perfect Spider-Man spirit was then trapped in the underworld like hell, and then from here it only gets more strange. Well, rather it gets more Banner. See, Banner was the current Sorcerer Supreme at this time, so he ended up freeing Peter in his astral form, but then Peter absorbed all those spirits of the damned while he was down there, so when he came back up, this perfect spider was now Ghost Spider. Number 9, Old Man Spider. Ezekiel Sims from Earth 4, aka Old Man Spider, took over the web-slinging spot after Peter Parker lost his life to Morlun. Now, Ezekiel first appeared in Edge of Spider-Verse issue 5. He was actually recruited by Spider UK, who I'll talk about a little bit later, to go against Morlun and the Inheritors. Now, Ezekiel rescued Ben Reilly and Kane from the Inheritors, which is awesome, and then a bunch of other spider beings were then recruited, but Deimos tracked them down and snapped this Spider-Man's neck. He caught him off guard. Brutal. And in his last words, he revealed his true self and told Peter to protect Silk, aka the Bride. All that matters. What a beautiful last sentence. We love impactful last words here at Top 10 Nerd. It's the best. And you know what else we like? We like when you like our videos. Literally, go and give this video a thumbs up and it will do wonders for our channel. We're trying our best, so you know, all we ask is for a little click. Maybe subscribe, maybe like, maybe notifications if you're feeling good. I don't know. Let's get back to the list. Number 8, Spider UK. Here he is, Billy Braddock himself. I told you I'd talk about him. He began his life as Captain Britain, actually, before he was webbing people up. So he's actually rocking both teams. He's a busy guy. He's on the Captain Britain team and then the Spider Army. He made his first appearance in Edge of Spider-Verse issue 2 over on Earth 833. Now, this Spider-Man is one of my favorite versions. His arc is so fun. He can hop between dimensions whenever he chooses, and then after the defeat of the Inheritors, spoilers, he keeps an eye on Earth 3145, and then during the Spider-Geddon storyline, in issue 2, Spider UK dies in an explosion and is buried in England on Earth 803, the home of Lady Spider, who loved the idea of Spider UK being buried in the same cemetery as her parents because she loved him like a brother, of course. Brother zoned even after death. He's down there like, really? Okay. That's a good one. Number 7, Spider-Man. Literally, this gets a little gross. Now imagine if Spider-Man had more spider than man when he was bit. That's what happened to Patton Parnell when he first entered comics in Edge of Spider-Verse issue 4. See, Patton lived a pretty dark life. He lived with an abusive Uncle Ted. He would perform horrible experiments on animals, and he spied on his neighbor Sarah Jane. So it's not a healthy system that he's got going on here in any way, really. One day, Sarah Jane and Patton went to Alcorp Industries in hopes of freeing all these test animals, but that's when Patton saw this red radioactive spider. He was like, I want to touch it. And then he did, got bit, and then got kicked out. Now, overnight, he didn't get jacked. His vision didn't get better. He wasn't webbing up Dr. Peppers and lamps. When he got his abilities, he started eating everything. He ate a mouse, and then he ate a cat, and then when Uncle Ted walked in, he was like, what's up? Now, this version is, of course, extremely powerful, but he's also extremely dark. We love the balance. We love balance. Number 6, Spider-CYBORG. Coming from Earth 2818, this version is a dark future Spider-Man. I mean, look at him, of course, there's some sort of future-ness going on here. He made his first debut in Superior Spider-Man issue 33. Now, it's Peter Parker if he got cybernetic additions. It's badass. That's basically all it is. His one eye can zoom in, go all tactical. The claws can certainly leave a mark. And one of the most remarkable features, his arm cannon, his sonic arm cannon, that's definitely a plus. Now, before Karn came to Earth 2818, our Superior Spider-Man warned him, and then when Kane finally did show up, Superior Spider-Man and some other webbed friends joined the battle. His left eye being a red lens is actually a nod to his appearance early on in the 90s in Spider-Man issue 21, titled Dealing Arms. Number 5, the Scarlet Spider. Ben Reilly first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man issue 149 as a clone. He was part of the whole clone thing that went on for way too long. But it wasn't until Spider-Man issue 5 that he was introduced to readers as the Scarlet Spider. Now, the Jackal created the clone using Peter's DNA, and he was made to fight Peter, of course. He's like, hey, if you can't beat him, just clone him. Now, the two were fighting it out in order to save Ned from a bomb, and then when the clone seemingly died, he was soon buried after. But the thing is, the Jackal injected him with something earlier so he could survive something like this. Of course. So for the next 5 years, he thought of himself as the useless clone that came back to life, then gave himself the name Ben Reilly. So depressed. Perhaps one of the better elements to come from the Clone Saga was Ben Reilly. One of the few things. Number 4, Spider-Man 2099. Ah yes, the not so near future. 2099 Spider-Man, aka Miguel O'Hara, is the current web-slinger over there, and his outfit is one of the more memorable ones. His DNA was biologically mixed with a spider's DNA, so it's a little bit different than our spider bite scenario that we have. Now, he worked at Alchemex and was pressured by the company to test genetic coding, and after Mr. Sims didn't make one of those test runs, just went horrible, Miguel was then poisoned by Tyler Stone with a fatal drug named Rapture, so Miguel ended up relying on the drug so much that he couldn't quit his job. How brutal is that? It's like every McDonald's employee. It's like, hey, you want free nuggets? Sign in tomorrow. You're not going anywhere. So Miguel ended up relying on the drug so much that he tried to genetically fix himself and fix his body. Now, of course, this had a brighter turnout than expected, but Miguel inherited Spider-Man abilities plus telepathy. Must be nice. Number 3, the Spider. Earth 15 Spider-Man, simply referred to as the Spider, comes into comics during the Exile storyline issue 12. Now, he was another Cletus Cassidy pretty much. I mean, he was a red-haired psycho who had no problem taking out innocent people, so when the Spider symbiote came along on this Earth, it merged with evil Peter, who was sentenced to not 1, not 2, but 67 life sentences from a jury. Okay, so he's bad. He was a big part of the Weapon X team, and he had Deadpool's sense of humor too, which made him just that much more evil. Now, in Exiles issue 44, he was finally stopped by Firestar when she hit him with a mega blast. He was later buried in the prison cemetery, so even after death, you're still doing that time. Number 2, Miles Morales. Of course, we gotta talk about him. He made his first appearance in Ultimate Fallout issue 4, just a couple months right before the death of Peter Parker. Now, this is a crazy time because Norman Osborn was just arrested and revealed as the Green Goblin, and while Miles was visiting his Uncle Aaron, an enhanced spider crawled out of Aaron's bag, bit Miles, and Bob's your uncle. You know the rest. Now, he got these amazing Spider-Man abilities, but he could also camouflage himself almost fully invisible. Plus, Venom blasts will help get the job done, that's for sure. The new PlayStation Spider-Man game is way more fun with these added abilities. Makes it way better, so I had to put him on this list and talk about them. Especially if we're talking about abilities. Hold L1 and just punch someone's chest through the wall, you're like, yeah, this is great. And finally, number 1, Cosmic Spider-Man, aka Captain Universe. This Spider-Man is one of, if not the most powerful alternate version of the Web-Slinger. Cosmic Spider-Man went toe-to-toe with Rune King Thor and came out on top. So if you're not sold now, just get out of here. Actually, don't get out of here. Watch the rest of this video. Don't even say that. Never mind. Cosmic Spider-Man is from Earth 13. He retains the powers of the Enigma Force, and he first appears in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 3, Issue 9. Cosmic Spider-Man can't leave his universe or else he would lose the Enigma Force. That's why the Resistance of Spider Heroes were based in Central Park of Earth 13. They're like, hey, no sweat, we'll come to you, no problem. We don't mind the commute. He meets his demise only a couple issues later, sadly, when the Inheritors were hunting down Spider-Man and their leader Solus drained the Enigma Force from him. But we can find more of him in What If Volume 2, Issue 31, titled What If Spider-Man Had Kept His Cosmic Powers, which I may or may not touch on in my next video. We'll see, stay tuned, it's a good one.